It was a chilly evening, the kind of night where the air felt crisp, and the city buzzed with quiet anticipation. Marcus, a man with confidence in his stride and a warm smile that could light up a room, pulled up to the entrance of the luxurious Grand Regent Hotel. He stepped out of his sleek, black car, dressed in a tailored suit that fit him like a glove. Marcus had built his life from the ground up, transforming humble beginnings into a story of relentless determination and success. But tonight, none of that seemed to matter. As he approached the grand, golden doors of the hotel, Marcus could feel the eyes of the doorman lingering a little too long. There was a slight hesitation as the doorman reached for the handle. Marcus brushed it off, assuming it was nothing more than an awkward moment. The real shock came when he entered the lobby. The space was magnificent, gleaming marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and polished counters that reflected the light like mirrors. It screamed of opulence and exclusivity, but the air inside felt cold, not because of the temperature but because of the energy. As Marcus walked to the front desk to check in, the receptionist, a middle-aged man with a stiff posture and a forced smile, barely looked up. "Good evening," Marcus began politely. "I have a reservation under Marcus Grant." The receptionist froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly before scanning his computer screen. There was an uncomfortable silence that stretched far too long. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mr. Grant, I'm sorry, but it seems there's been a mistake. We don't have any rooms available." Marcus frowned, confused. "A mistake? I booked this room weeks ago." "Are you sure?" The man behind the desk gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind that held no warmth. "I'm sure. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the other hotels in the area," he said, his tone dismissive. Marcus felt the weight of the words hanging in the air. It wasn't the words themselves but the tone, the way the man's gaze flicked over him, not with curiosity but judgment. He glanced around and noticed the other staff exchanging looks, whispering quietly to each other. "I see," Marcus replied calmly, though he could feel the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Is this about my reservation, or is there something else you're not telling me?" The receptionist's expression faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. "Sir, I'm not sure what you mean," he said, but the look in his eyes told a different story. By now, Marcus could feel the stares of other guests in the lobby. He straightened his shoulders, refusing to let the growing humiliation show. "Fine," he said, his voice steady but firm. "If you can't honor my reservation, I'll leave." He turned on his heel and walked out, the weight of the rejection pressing down on him. But as he stepped back into his car, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about being turned away from a hotel. It was about something deeper, something that cut to the core of who he was and how he was perceived. As Marcus drove away, the city lights flashing past his windows, his mind raced. He had faced discrimination before, but this felt personal, blatant, and unapologetic. By the time he reached home, his initial frustration had transformed into something far more powerful: resolve. The next morning, Marcus sat at his desk, his laptop open and his phone buzzing with messages. He had spent the entire night thinking, planning, and making calls. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. What the hotel staff didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just a successful businessman, he was a billionaire. A man with the resources and connections to turn any obstacle into an opportunity. And this time, he wasn't going to let their prejudice win. By the end of the day, a deal had been set into motion, one that would change everything. Marcus smiled to himself, thinking about the irony of it all. They had judged him based on the color of his skin, not knowing he was about to become the very thing they couldn't ignore: their new boss. And so, as the sun set on another day, the wheels were already in motion for Marcus's return to the Grand Regent Hotel. Only this time, he wouldn't be walking in as a guest. He would be walking in as the owner. The following day, the Grand Regent Hotel was buzzing with its usual activity. Guests in designer suits and dresses strolled through the lobby, chatting casually, completely unaware of the storm brewing just outside their perfect world. The staff, too, went about their routines, polished shoes clicking against the marble floors, crisp uniforms perfectly pressed. For them, it was just another day at work. But Marcus, now sitting in his private office miles away, had plans that would soon ripple through every corner of that pristine hotel. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen of his laptop. A detailed file about the Grand Regent Hotel was open, displaying everything from its financial performance to its ownership structure. His assistant, Clara, a sharp and no-nonsense woman with an uncanny ability to read people, stood nearby, watching him carefully. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I mean, it's bold, Marcus. But you know they're going to fight back." Marcus looked up, his expression calm but resolute. "I've dealt with bigger fights than this, Clara. This isn't just about me. It's about making a point." Clara nodded, though her brow furrowed slightly. She knew Marcus well enough to understand that once his mind was made up, there was no changing it. "All right," she said. "I've made the calls. Everything's lined up. You're officially in play to acquire the property." "Good," Marcus replied. "Let's make it happen." As Clara left the room, Marcus turned his chair to face the large window behind him. The city stretched out before him, a sprawling mix of glass, steel, and endless possibilities. He thought back to the night before, to the moment he walked out of that hotel feeling small despite everything he had accomplished. It wasn't the rejection itself that stung the most, it was the reminder that, to some people, his success, his wealth, and his status would never be enough. He closed his eyes, remembering his childhood. Growing up in a small, tight-knit neighborhood, Marcus had learned early on what it meant to be underestimated. His family wasn't wealthy, but they were rich in love and values. His mother, a teacher, always told him to hold his head high and let his work speak for itself. His father, a mechanic, had taught him the value of persistence and the importance of fighting for what was right. As a kid, Marcus had big dreams. He wanted to build something that would last, something that would not only make his family proud but also create opportunities for others like him. It wasn't an easy road. He had faced countless rejections, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But each time, he had pushed forward, fueled by an unshakable belief that he was meant for more. That belief had carried him through college, through the long hours building his first company, and through the endless nights of strategizing how to grow his business. And now, it had brought him here, a billionaire with the power to take on a system that had tried to dismiss him. Meanwhile, back at the Grand Regent, the staff continued their day, blissfully unaware of the looming changes. The receptionist from the night before, Henry, leaned against the counter, chatting with a coworker. "Did you see that guy last night?" Henry asked, smirking. "Thought he could just walk in here like he owned the place. Probably couldn't afford half the stuff on our menu." His coworker laughed awkwardly, shifting uncomfortably in her shoes. "I don't know, Henry. He seemed different. I don't think he was just some random guy." Henry scoffed. "Please, these types always think they're entitled to something. It's our job to keep the standards high around here." What Henry didn't realize was that his words would soon come back to haunt him. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his living room, surrounded by documents and blueprints of the Grand Regent Hotel. He studied every detail with the precision of a surgeon. He wasn't just planning to buy the hotel, he was planning to transform it. He wanted it to be a place where everyone, no matter who they were, felt welcome and respected. He thought about the countless other people who might have faced the same treatment he did, people who didn't have the resources or the platform to fight back. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about rewriting the rules. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed a number. On the other end, a smooth voice answered. "Mr. Grant, we've finalized the agreement. You're officially the majority stakeholder in the Grand Regent Hotel." Marcus smiled, a quiet satisfaction washing over him. "Thank you. Let's move forward with the next steps. I want to meet with their management team immediately." The call ended, and Marcus leaned back, exhaling deeply. This was only the beginning. He knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he was ready. The next day, the news broke. The Grand Regent Hotel had been acquired by a new owner, a private investor whose name hadn't yet been disclosed. The staff was buzzing with speculation, wondering who this mysterious buyer could be. Henry, of course, dismissed the news as unimportant. "Doesn't matter who owns it," he said confidently. "As long as they don't mess with the way we do things around here." But deep down, some of the staff couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to change. Back in his office, Marcus prepared for his first visit to the hotel as its new owner. He had intentionally kept his identity under wraps, wanting to see their reactions firsthand. He knew it wouldn't be easy to face them again, but he also knew that moments like this were where real change began. As he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, Marcus felt a familiar mix of nerves and determination. This wasn't just a business move, it was personal. And he was ready to make his presence known. He grabbed his coat and headed out the door, the city lights reflecting in his car's windows as he drove toward the hotel. The Grand Regent's golden facade loomed in the distance, its towering structure a symbol of everything he was about to challenge. As Marcus stepped out of his car and walked toward the entrance, the same doorman from the night before froze, his eyes widening in recognition. This time, Marcus didn't wait for him to open the door. He pushed it open himself, his footsteps echoing across the marble floor. The lobby fell silent as Marcus entered, his presence commanding attention. The staff exchanged nervous glances, their whispers barely audible. Henry, standing behind the front desk, felt his stomach drop as he locked eyes with Marcus. Marcus smiled, his expression calm but unreadable. "Good evening," he said, his voice steady. "I believe we have some things to discuss." And just like that, the tables had turned. The staff of the Grand Regent Hotel was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The room was heavy with silence as Marcus stood in the center of the Grand Regent's lobby. His presence was magnetic, commanding attention from every corner. The staff whispered among themselves, their voices barely audible over the faint background music. Some recognized him immediately, their faces paling as they connected the dots. Others simply stood frozen, sensing that whoever he was, this man wasn't someone to be dismissed. Henry, who had been so smug just the day before, was now rooted in place behind the reception desk. His throat felt dry, and he couldn't muster a single word. The confident air he usually carried had all but evaporated. Marcus took his time, letting the tension in the room build. His calm exterior didn't betray the emotions simmering beneath the surface. Clara walked in behind him, her sharp heels clicking on the marble floor. She carried a leather folder under her arm and gave a quick glance around the lobby, her expression professional but cold. She leaned in slightly toward Marcus. "They're ready for the meeting in the boardroom," she said softly. Marcus nodded but didn't move immediately. Instead, he let his gaze sweep across the staff, lingering just long enough on Henry to make the man shift uncomfortably. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice measured and deliberate. "Thank you, Clara," he said. Then, turning slightly toward the desk, he added, "But first, I think I need to introduce myself." The staff exchanged uneasy glances, and Marcus could feel the tension thickening. He took a few steps closer to the desk, standing directly across from Henry. "You might remember me," Marcus said, his tone calm but with an edge that cut through the silence. "I was here just a couple of nights ago. I had a reservation, but I was told there were no rooms available." Henry's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. Marcus didn't wait for him to recover. "What you didn't know," Marcus continued, "is that I wasn't just here to stay as a guest. I was also evaluating how this hotel operates. And I have to say, what I experienced was enlightening." The last word hung in the air like a challenge. The receptionist shifted awkwardly, glancing at his colleagues, but no one stepped in to help. Clara, standing off to the side, glanced at her watch, signaling subtly to Marcus that it was time to move on. Marcus let the silence linger for another moment before stepping back. "We'll have time to address these issues later," he said, his voice now lighter but no less authoritative. "For now, I have a meeting to attend." With that, Marcus turned and headed toward the elevator, Clara following close behind. The doors closed, leaving the staff in the lobby staring after him, a mix of confusion, fear, and curiosity etched across their faces. Upstairs, the boardroom was a stark contrast to the bustling lobby. The walls were lined with framed photographs of the hotel's history, smiling founders shaking hands, grand openings attended by celebrities, and snapshots of past luxury events. The long conference table was polished to perfection, and a group of sharply dressed executives sat waiting. When Marcus walked in, they all rose from their seats, their faces carefully neutral. They had heard rumors of the new owner's arrival but hadn't expected the man standing before them. Marcus could feel their hesitation, their unspoken questions hanging in the air. He greeted them with a nod and took his seat at the head of the table. "Let's get straight to the point," Marcus began. "As of yesterday, I am the majority owner of this hotel. I've reviewed your financials, your operations, and your staff performance. While the Grand Regent has a reputation for luxury, I believe there's significant room for improvement." The executives shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. One of them, a tall man with silver hair and an air of self-importance, cleared his throat. "Mr. Grant," he began, "we appreciate your investment in the Grand Regent. However, we've been operating successfully for decades. Any changes to our structure or policies should be carefully considered to maintain our brand's legacy." Marcus met the man's gaze, his expression unreadable. "I understand the importance of legacy," he said. "But let me be clear. Legacy doesn't give anyone the right to discriminate against potential customers. My experience the other night was not just unacceptable, it was emblematic of a larger problem within this organization." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Some of the executives shifted uncomfortably, while others avoided his gaze entirely. "I don't intend to dismantle what works," Marcus continued. "But I will not tolerate a culture that turns people away based on assumptions or prejudice. That ends now." The silver-haired man leaned forward, his voice measured. "Mr. Grant, with all due respect, we've always maintained high standards at this hotel. It's what sets us apart from our competitors." Marcus smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "High standards are not an excuse for low values," he replied. The room was silent again, but this time, it was clear who held the power. Marcus let his words sink in before continuing. "We're going to make changes," he said. "Not just in how we operate but in how we treat people, guests and staff alike. This hotel will set a new standard for what luxury means, excellence without exclusion." As the meeting continued, Marcus outlined his vision for the hotel, detailing plans for training programs, new hiring policies, and community outreach initiatives. The executives, though hesitant at first, began to see the potential in his ideas. Still, Marcus knew there were some who would resist. Change was never easy, especially for those who benefited from the status quo. Meanwhile, back in the lobby, the staff buzzed with speculation. Henry, who had finally regained his composure, tried to laugh off the encounter, but his coworkers weren't convinced. "You think he's really the new owner?" one of them asked. Henry shrugged, though his forced grin betrayed his unease. "Come on, that guy? No way. He's probably just bluffing." But deep down, Henry wasn't so sure. And as the hours passed, the weight of Marcus's return began to sink in. For the first time in years, Henry felt something he wasn't used to: vulnerability. By the time Marcus and Clara left the boardroom, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the city. As they rode the elevator back down to the lobby, Clara glanced at him. "You made quite an impression up there," she said. Marcus smiled faintly. "That's the easy part," he replied. "The real work starts now." When the elevator doors opened, the lobby was as busy as ever, but this time, the atmosphere felt different. Staff members stood a little straighter, their movements more deliberate. Even Henry, now stationed behind the desk, seemed subdued. As Marcus walked through the lobby, his presence once again commanded attention. He didn't stop to address the staff this time, but his message was clear. Change was coming, and there was no stopping it. Outside, as Marcus stepped into his car, he glanced back at the towering facade of the Grand Regent. It was more than just a building to him now. It was a symbol, a reminder of what could happen when people were brave enough to challenge the system. And Marcus was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's presence at the Grand Regent became impossible to ignore. Though he didn't visit every day, his influence was felt in every corner of the hotel. New policies were introduced, and training sessions were scheduled. The changes were small at first, adjustments to how reservations were handled, updates to staff protocols, but they sent ripples through the organization. Henry, who had managed to avoid direct contact with Marcus since that fateful day in the lobby, began to feel the weight of the changes. The whispers among the staff grew louder. People speculated about what would happen next and whether Marcus's vision would fundamentally reshape the hotel. For some, the changes were welcome; for others, they felt like an unwelcome intrusion. Behind closed doors, Marcus continued to meet with the management team, pushing his vision forward. But he also knew that not everyone in the room supported him. The silver-haired executive, whose name Marcus had learned was Charles, had been particularly resistant. "I understand your perspective, Mr. Grant," Charles had said in one meeting, his tone careful but firm. "But you have to consider the clientele we cater to. They expect a certain exclusivity. If we dilute that, we risk alienating our most loyal guests." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Charles. "Exclusivity is one thing," he said. "Discrimination is another. What happened to me the other night wasn't just bad for business, it was unacceptable, full stop." If our loyal guests can't accept that, maybe they're not the kind of guests we should be catering to." The room had gone silent after that, and Marcus could feel the tension in the air. But he didn't back down. He wasn't here to make friends. He was here to make a statement. Outside the boardroom, the staff began to feel the pressure of the changes. Clara had been conducting spot checks on the front desk, asking staff members pointed questions about their interactions with guests. Rumors swirled that Marcus was planning a complete overhaul of the team, and many employees worried they might be next on the chopping block. Henry, in particular, found himself increasingly paranoid. He replayed his encounter with Marcus in his mind, wondering if he'd be singled out. Every time Marcus walked through the lobby, Henry felt his stomach tighten, expecting the worst. But Marcus never acknowledged him, never even looked in his direction. One evening, as Henry was finishing his shift, he noticed Clara standing by the lobby entrance, speaking to a man in a suit. They exchanged a few words before the man handed Clara a clipboard. Henry couldn't make out what they were saying, but something about their conversation made him uneasy. As soon as Clara walked away, Henry approached one of his coworkers. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The coworker shrugged. "I heard they're reviewing staff performance," she said. "Maybe even doing some background checks. Guess they're cleaning house." Henry felt a chill run down his spine. He thought back to all the times he'd bent the rules, all the moments he'd acted out of arrogance rather than professionalism. He had always assumed his charm and seniority would protect him, but now he wasn't so sure. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. He thought about confronting Marcus, explaining himself, maybe even apologizing. But every time he imagined the conversation, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. Meanwhile, Marcus was deep in his own preparations. The changes he had implemented so far were only the beginning. He had bigger plans for the Grand Regent, plans that would challenge the very foundation of its culture. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. Late one night, Marcus sat in his office, reviewing applications for a new general manager. The current one, a man named Philip, had been cooperative but uninspired. Marcus needed someone who shared his vision, someone who could lead the team with both authority and empathy. Clara walked in, carrying a cup of coffee. She placed it on the desk and sat across from him. "You look exhausted," she said, studying him. Marcus smiled faintly. "It's been a long few weeks," he admitted. "You're making progress," Clara said. "But you're also making enemies. Charles, Philip, even some of the staff, they're not all on board." "I didn't expect them to be," Marcus replied. "Change always comes with resistance. But if we do this right, it'll be worth it." Clara nodded, though her expression remained serious. "Just be careful," she said. "Not everyone plays fair." Marcus looked at her, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Have you heard something?" Clara hesitated before answering. "Nothing concrete," she said. "But I've been around long enough to know when people are plotting. Charles has too much to lose if you succeed. Don't underestimate him." Marcus nodded, filing her words away for later. He had always known this fight wouldn't be easy, but Clara's warning added a new layer of urgency. The next day, Marcus arrived at the hotel unannounced, walking through the lobby with the quiet confidence that had become his trademark. He noticed the subtle changes in the staff's behavior. The way they straightened up when they saw him, the forced smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. He approached the front desk, where Henry was stationed. For a moment, Henry froze, unsure of what to do. Marcus gave him a polite nod but said nothing, moving on toward the elevator. As Marcus disappeared from view, Henry let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. But the reprieve was short-lived. Moments later, Clara approached the desk, her clipboard in hand. "Henry," she said, her tone brisk. "I need to speak with you in the office." Henry felt his heart sink. He followed Clara down the hallway, his mind racing with excuses, explanations, anything that might save him. When they reached the office, Clara closed the door and gestured for him to sit. Henry's hands fidgeted in his lap as he waited for her to speak. Finally, Clara looked up from her clipboard, her expression unreadable. "We've been reviewing your performance," she began, her voice calm but firm. "There are some concerns." Henry swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "Concerns?" he repeated weakly. Clara nodded. "Your attitude toward guests, your adherence to policies, it's all being taken into account. Mr. Grant has made it clear that we're setting a new standard here, and we need to ensure every member of the team is aligned with that vision. Henry felt a surge of panic. I can change, he blurted out. I mean, I know I've made mistakes, but I can do better. Just give me a chance. Clara studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing. That's not for me to decide, she said. But I'll be honest with you, this isn't just about you. It's about the culture of this hotel. And right now, it's under a microscope. Henry nodded, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that his time at the Grand Regent was running out. But what he didn't realize was that the events unfolding around him were much bigger than his own fate. Upstairs, Marcus was meeting with a group of potential partners, laying the groundwork for the next phase of his plan. The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone in the room could feel that something significant was about to happen. But as Marcus spoke, outlining his vision with unwavering conviction, he couldn't shake the sense that the real battle was still ahead. And somewhere in the shadows of the hotel, forces were already at work, determined to stop him before he could succeed. The evening had settled into a quiet hum at the Grand Regent, the kind of calm that only came after a long day of endless movement. Yet, beneath the surface, the tension was anything but settled. Marcus, still in his office, leaned back in his chair, staring at the city skyline through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The meeting with potential partners had gone well, better than expected, in fact, but something about Clara's warning the night before kept nagging at him. He was about to close his laptop when his phone buzzed. It was Clara. Her text was short but urgent. Come to the lobby. Now. Marcus frowned, grabbed his jacket, and made his way downstairs. The elevator ride felt slower than usual, and by the time the doors opened, he could already sense that something was off. The lobby, typically bustling even late into the night, was eerily quiet. A few staff members stood clustered near the entrance, their faces pale and their whispers hushed. Clara was waiting near the reception desk, her expression tight with a mix of frustration and concern. She motioned for Marcus to follow her into the adjacent lounge area, away from prying ears. What's going on? Marcus asked, his voice low but firm. Clara glanced around to ensure no one was listening. There's been a leak, she said. Marcus's brow furrowed. A leak? What kind of leak? Clara handed him her phone, where a social media post was displayed. It was a blurry photo of Marcus entering the hotel with a caption that read, "New owner of the Grand Regent stirring up chaos. Is this the end of luxury as we know it?" Marcus scanned the comments, his jaw tightening as he read the speculation. Some accused him of trying to commercialize the hotel, while others claimed he was planning to fire the entire staff. But the worst were the comments that turned personal, questioning his credentials, his motives, and even his right to own such an establishment. This came out about an hour ago, Clara said. And it's already gaining traction. A couple of smaller news outlets are picking it up. Marcus handed the phone back, his expression unreadable. Do we know who's behind it? Clara shook her head. Not yet, but it's clearly someone on the inside. The timing, the details, they knew exactly when to strike. Marcus exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He had anticipated resistance, even sabotage, but this was a direct attack. And it wasn't just about him. It was about the hotel's reputation, the staff, and the future he was trying to build. Charles, Marcus said finally. Clara nodded. He's the obvious suspect. But he's not the only one who stands to lose if you succeed. There are plenty of people who don't want things to change. Marcus paced the lounge, his hands clenched into fists. This isn't just about me, he said. They're trying to undermine everything we're doing here. If we don't get ahead of this, it could derail the entire plan. Clara hesitated before speaking. There's more, she said. Marcus stopped pacing and turned to her. What? Clara handed him a printed email. This came through our system an hour before the post went live. It was sent anonymously to some of the staff. Marcus scanned the email, his stomach sinking as he read the accusations. It claimed that Marcus's ownership of the hotel was illegitimate, that he had used underhanded tactics to force the sale. Worse, it accused him of planning to sell off parts of the hotel to developers, turning it into a soulless corporate chain. This is a coordinated attack, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded. And it's working. Staff morale is plummeting. Some of them are already talking about looking for other jobs. Marcus felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had known this would be a fight, but he hadn't expected it to escalate so quickly, or so publicly. Back in the lobby, Henry watched the commotion from a distance, his nerves fraying with each passing minute. He had overheard bits and pieces of the conversation between Clara and Marcus, and though he didn't know all the details, he could tell that something big was happening. Henry's guilt gnawed at him. He had always prided himself on staying out of office politics, but now he found himself caught in the middle of something far bigger than he had anticipated. He thought back to the moments he had dismissed guests or cut corners, wondering if his actions had contributed to the chaos unfolding around him. But as the night wore on, Henry began to notice something strange. Charles, who usually kept his distance from the front desk, was lingering in the lobby. He seemed unusually animated, speaking in hushed tones to a few staff members and gesturing toward the lounge where Marcus and Clara were meeting. Henry couldn't shake the feeling that Charles was somehow involved in the unfolding drama. The older man had always been quick to dismiss Marcus's ideas, and now, with rumors swirling about sabotage, his behavior felt too coincidental to ignore. Meanwhile, Marcus and Clara worked late into the night, strategizing their next move. They decided to hold an emergency staff meeting the following morning, hoping to address the rumors head-on and reassure the team. But even as they planned, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the attack wasn't over. Whoever was behind it had made their first move, but there was more to come. And as he sat in his office, staring at the framed photo of the Grand Regent's original founders, he made a silent promise to himself. No matter what it took, he would see this through. In the shadows of the hotel, the forces working against him were already preparing their next move. And as the clock ticked closer to morning, the stakes grew higher, the tension thicker, and the path to resolution more uncertain than ever. The next morning, the Grand Regent was buzzing with anticipation. The staff gathered in the main conference room, murmuring nervously as they waited for Marcus to address the situation. Whispers of the anonymous email and the social media post had spread like wildfire, and the tension in the air was palpable. Everyone was on edge, unsure of what to expect. Marcus entered the room with Clara by his side, his expression calm but serious. He stood at the front, scanning the faces of the staff before speaking. "I know many of you have heard the rumors," he began, his voice steady. "And I want to address them directly. Transparency is important to me, and I believe you all deserve the truth." The room fell silent as Marcus explained the circumstances of his purchase of the Grand Regent. He spoke about his vision for the hotel, emphasizing his commitment to preserving its legacy while making it more inclusive and welcoming to all. He acknowledged the resistance to change but reminded the staff that progress often comes with challenges. "I understand that some of you may feel uncertain about the future," he said. "But I promise you this. I am here to build something better, not tear it down. And I hope you'll join me in that mission." As Marcus spoke, Henry watched from the back of the room, his guilt growing heavier with every word. He hadn't told anyone, but he had received the anonymous email too. And while he hadn't forwarded it or spread the rumors, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had contributed to the toxic culture that allowed such sabotage to take root. When Marcus finished speaking, he opened the floor for questions. At first, no one spoke, the tension in the room too thick to break. But then, to everyone's surprise, Charles stood up. "Mr. Grant," he began, his tone measured but sharp, "while I appreciate your transparency, I have to wonder if your vision aligns with the values of this establishment. The Grand Regent has always been a symbol of exclusivity and luxury, and I worry that your changes could compromise that." Marcus met Charles's gaze, his expression unreadable. "I understand your concerns, Charles," he said. "But let me ask you this. What good is exclusivity if it comes at the expense of fairness and dignity? Shouldn't true luxury make everyone feel valued?" The room was silent, all eyes on Charles. For a moment, it seemed like he might back down. But then, with a sly smile, he pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. "Since we're being transparent," Charles said, "I think it's only fair to share some information I've come across. This is a report detailing your supposed plans to sell off parts of the hotel to developers." "Care to explain?" Gasps rippled through the room as Charles slid the folder toward Marcus. Clara stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "That's enough," she said. "You've been trying to undermine this from the beginning, Charles. But this is a new low, even for you." Marcus opened the folder, his expression calm as he scanned the pages. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. "This is impressive," he said, closing the folder. "It's completely fabricated, of course, but impressive nonetheless. Charles's smug expression faltered. What are you talking about? These documents, Marcus said, holding up the folder, are fake. And I can prove it. He turned to Clara, who handed him her tablet. You see, I anticipated resistance. So, I've been keeping meticulous records of every decision I've made and every plan I've discussed. None of what's in here aligns with reality. And more importantly, he added, looking directly at Charles, I know exactly where this came from. Charles's face went pale. That's a serious accusation, he said, his voice shaking slightly. You'd better have proof. Oh, I do, Marcus said, his tone icy. He tapped a few buttons on the tablet, projecting an image onto the conference room screen. It was a series of emails from Charles's account, detailing his plans to sabotage Marcus and spread misinformation. The room erupted into shocked murmurs. Charles stammered, trying to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. Clara stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. This is exactly the kind of behavior we're working to eliminate, she said. And it won't be tolerated. Charles tried to argue, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. You're done here, he said. Pack your things and leave. As security escorted Charles out of the room, Marcus turned back to the staff. I know this has been a difficult time for all of you, he said. But I hope this serves as a turning point. The Grand Regent is more than a building, it's a symbol of excellence. And together, we can make it a symbol of fairness and respect as well. The staff applauded, and for the first time in weeks, the atmosphere in the room felt lighter. But just as the meeting was wrapping up, Henry stepped forward. Mr. Grant, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I need to say something. Marcus looked at him, his expression encouraging. Go ahead. Henry took a deep breath. I want to apologize, he said, for the way I treated you that night in the lobby. I was wrong, and I let my own biases cloud my judgment. I've realized now that I was part of the problem, and I want to do better. Marcus studied him for a moment before nodding. Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step, he said. The real question is, what are you going to do next? Henry nodded, his determination clear. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. The meeting ended on a hopeful note, but as Marcus returned to his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't entirely over. Later that night, as he reviewed the hotel's financials, his phone buzzed with a new notification. It was an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, Asterisk, you thought this was over? Marcus opened the email, his heart racing as he read the message. It was a warning, cryptic but clear. Someone else was still working against him. The fight for the Grand Regent wasn't over yet, and the next move would be even more dangerous. Marcus sat in his office, the soft glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows against the walls. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he stared at the cryptic email that had just landed in his inbox. His first instinct was to dismiss it, another attempt to distract him from his work, but something about it gnawed at him. It wasn't the typical anonymous threat. There was a subtle confidence in the words, a sense that the sender knew something about him. He leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. The battle for the Grand Regent had taken so many twists and turns, but this felt different. It wasn't just about Charles anymore or even the public smear campaign. It was something more personal. Someone else was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Clara's voice broke his thoughts as she entered the room, her expression tense. Marcus, we need to talk. He motioned for her to sit down. I just got another email. They're still out there, Clara. Whoever's behind this isn't finished yet. Clara's face softened with concern. Marcus, it's been a long road, but you've done everything you could to turn things around. The staff is behind you now. Charles is gone, and the rumors are dying down. This hotel needs you to lead it. You're not alone in this. I know, Marcus said, his voice quieter now. But something doesn't feel right. This isn't just about me anymore. Whoever this is, whoever's still pulling strings, has been watching and waiting for their moment. Clara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Then we'll find out who it is, together. Marcus stood up, feeling the weight of her words. There had been enough secrecy and hidden motives. It was time to face whatever was coming, head on. He needed to get to the bottom of this once and for all. The next morning, Marcus called a meeting with key staff members, those who had stood by him through the roughest moments. Henry was among them, his presence a reminder of the strides he'd made in becoming part of the solution. They all sat around the table, eager to hear Marcus's plan. I know it's been a tough few weeks, Marcus began, his voice steady but resolute. But we've made it through the storm, and we're stronger for it. The Grand Regent is more than just a luxury hotel. It's a place where people come to feel valued, where they can be their best selves. And that starts with all of us. There was a pause as everyone absorbed his words. But, Marcus continued, there's still someone working in the shadows, trying to undermine us. And I won't stand for it. We're going to find out who's behind this, and we're going to put a stop to it once and for all. Clara spoke up, her voice full of conviction. We've been through the worst. We're a family here, and no one can break that. Let's go after this together. Marcus nodded. Exactly. We'll use everything at our disposal to get to the bottom of this. We'll start by looking into any connections between the rumors, Charles's actions, and anyone who may have been pulling strings behind the scenes. This time, we'll uncover the truth. For the next few days, the team worked tirelessly, combing through records, emails, and surveillance footage. Clara coordinated with the legal team to ensure everything was above board, while Henry helped track down any leads from within the hotel. Everyone was determined to uncover the hidden forces threatening to destroy everything they'd fought for. Then, one afternoon, a breakthrough came. Henry had noticed something odd. An account that had been sending out anonymous emails to staff members, supposedly from disgruntled guests. It turned out that the emails were coming from a temporary email address linked to an IP address in the hotel's own security system. The pieces began to fall into place. Marcus immediately connected the dots. The person behind the sabotage wasn't someone from the outside at all. It was someone within the hotel itself. That evening, Marcus confronted the individual in question. Henry's direct superior, Alex, a senior manager who had seemed loyal but had always kept his distance from Marcus's leadership. As Marcus walked into Alex's office, the tension was palpable. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew it had to end here. Alex, Marcus began, his voice steady, we need to talk. Alex's eyes flickered with panic, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. Of course, Marcus. What's on your mind? I know what you've been doing, Marcus said, his voice low. You've been behind the emails, the leaks, the rumors. You've been trying to tear this place apart from the inside. Alex's facade cracked for just a moment, his hands trembling slightly. You don't understand, he said, his voice rising. I've been here longer than you. I know what this place was. And I couldn't let you change it. You're not the only one with a history here, Marcus replied, his tone calm but firm. But this place isn't about holding on to the past. It's about building a future. And that future doesn't have room for sabotage. Alex's shoulders slumped, and the fight left him. He didn't have any more excuses. The truth was out, and the damage he had done was undeniable. I never wanted it to get this far, Alex said quietly, his voice filled with regret. But I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything I knew, of watching it all slip away. Marcus studied him for a moment, his mind racing. He had every right to fire Alex on the spot, to have him escorted out of the hotel without a second glance. But something in his expression told him that Alex wasn't beyond redemption. I won't fire you, Marcus said finally, his voice softer. But you'll be reassigned. You'll have to earn back the trust you've lost. And if you ever try something like this again, you'll be gone for good. Alex nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and gratitude. Thank you. As Marcus walked back to his office, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The hotel was secure now, and the last of the hidden threats had been neutralized. The road had been long and filled with obstacles, but the Grand Regent was finally in safe hands. Weeks passed, and the hotel's reputation began to rebuild. The staff embraced the changes Marcus had set in motion, and guests returned, eager to experience the warmth and hospitality that had always made the Grand Regent special. And as for Marcus, he reflected on everything he had learned, about leadership, about resilience, and about the power of trust. He had fought for the future of the Grand Regent, and in the end, it wasn't just the hotel that had emerged stronger, but himself as well. The lessons learned from the struggle would stay with him forever, and as he stood in the lobby, watching the guests flow through the doors, he couldn't help but smile. The journey had been hard, but in the end, it had been worth every challenge. The Grand Regent had weathered the storm, and it was now poised for a bright future.